And now, to wrap up the first part of the program, I would like to welcome another good friend of mine and a great friend of UNCF, and my colleague on the Teach for America Board of Directors, and along with UNCF board member Linda Johnson Rice, on the council of which he is co-chair and soon to be opened in September of this year, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, the first African American museum in the Smithsonian Museums in Washington, D.C. He is the former chairman and CEO of Time Warner, and he is the former chairman of Citigroup. Currently, he is the interim CEO of the Los Angeles Clippers and senior advisor to Providence Equity Partners. Please join me in welcoming Richard Parsons.
Thank you, Michael, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. No more Clippers. Done. Steve Ballmer's. I'm not really 100% sure what I'm supposed to do right now, because originally, when I was asked to do this, they said, well, we want you to introduce your twin brother, Joel Klein. But I just saw him sit down. He's had more than enough introduction, but he did do a terrific job, and all the honorees are to be congratulated for what they've done for the United Negro College Fund over the course of many years. I thought what I would do, though, because we have, this notion of education, everybody's talking about how important it is, how important it is. Mine is a terrible thing to waste. But, what does it really mean? When the rubber meets the road, how does it manifest itself in people's lives? And how does it then replicate itself in the lives of the people that those people engage with? And I thought I'd tell you a story. Some of you in this audience may know it, but probably not many. It's a personal story. When I was coming out of law school, I was fortunate enough to get a job with a man named Nelson Rockefeller, who was then governor of the state of New York. And we became great pals, and without going through all the ins and outs, at the end of the day, I became his personal lawyer, and for a period of time, he gave me a house on the Rockefeller estate up in Westchester. So I moved on to the estate with my family. Now, unbeknownst to most people, actually the governor knew this, but not many others did, my grandfather, a man named William Judd, had been the head groundskeeper on the Rockefeller estate in the 30s and the 40s. And he let that secret out one day. And some old guy who had been hired by my grandfather in the depths of the Depression, come over here from Poland with his sister, came over and sat with me for about half an hour and told me stories about my grandfather, who I never really knew. My grandfather on my mother's side died when I was 3 years old. And he related these stories of this actually pretty great guy, right? He was smart, he was charismatic, he was a good leader. Everyone looked to him for guidance and wisdom. They enjoyed his company, and he led that group for maybe 15 years. And I talked to my wife about that. I said, it never occurred to me before, because I was still in my late 20s, so I thought I was pretty spiffy myself. But I realized that I was just kind of a knockoff of my grandfather, right? And yet, the arc of his possibilities, of his career was, and he got to the top of it, he could be the head groundskeeper on the estate. And, I went on to be not only the governor's lawyer, I ran Time Warner, which at the time was the largest media and entertainment company in the world, Citigroup, which was one of the largest banks in the world, a lot of other stuff. What happened? What changed? And it really comes down to one word: education. Education, In part because of what Joel just talked about, Brown versus Board of Education, where African Americans were now permitted to go to schools, and the best schools across the country, and because we were encouraged by our parents and now ultimately by society to get educated, to get qualified, to get to a place where we could bring to bear our potential as individuals, as educated individuals. That's what happened. And so when I think of the UNCF, and I go way, way back with the UNCF, to me, that's what it's all about. It's about empowering individuals to realize their full potential by educating their minds, by permitting them to have an opportunity to do what I did and my grandfather did not have a chance to do, and that is develop their full potential. And of course, you know, in America, actually in the world, it requires resources. That's in part what tonight's about, but it's more fundamental than just resources. It's about how you change the society, how you bring about true equity, and the kinds of things that Robert Smith talked about, that Joel talked about, and that I'm sure Reverend Al is going to talk about in terms of true equity in society. So as you think about tonight, think about that story and think about the tangible ways in which admission to education not only changed my life, it changed the lives of my family, the many, many people I worked with, and so on down the line. I want to say one final thing before I sit down, and that's about Michael and what he's done here. UNCF, as he says, has been around a long time. It's older than I am, which means it's old. But he's figured out, you know, for so long, a lot of the organizations kind of existed in their own silos and did their own thing. I remember when I was at Time Warner, we were always struggling to find, you know, qualified minorities for this, that, and the other thing. And people would always talk about the pipeline, you know, got to get the pipeline filled up. Well, the reality is there is a thing called a pipeline. There is, in the society, it has to start somewhere, and then people come through. And as Joe was indicated, it starts in pre-K. It starts even before you go into formal school, and then you come up through K through 12, and then you go through college, and then you get a job, and you get on the train. And so I think what Michael has tried to do is, he calls it a bridge. I would call it sort of pipeline building. Put the UNCF in its proper context as a part of that pipeline, as taking these young, talented people who have drive and energy and now the resources to pursue their potential and moving them through the pipeline into the private sector, whether it's STEM or some other part of the private sector, so that the pipeline is now filled and now working. So I congratulate you, Michael, for taking UNCF, not in a new direction, but in a more comprehensive and integrated and thoughtful direction. And I think that the Alliance We Teach for America, which focuses on K through 12, is brilliant. And I think that your selection of the 3 honorees tonight, one from the private sector, who's the off-taker, one from Joel's, you know, former vineyards where he toiled, the K through 12, and then, of course, the community has to wrap around all this and support all this. So my good friend Al Sharpton, I think knitting that all together and saying that we are one, that we are part of an integrated attempt to really continue the progress that's been made is brilliant, and you're congratulated. So thank you all for listening. Again, congratulations to the 3 winners, and I hope all of you have a good evening. And think about that story. Think about, you know, what does it really mean? What does admission to education mean, not only in this country, but in this world? It means pursuit of opportunity. Thank you.